Welcome to your Artsy Girl podcast. I am your host, Christina Carrere. This is a podcast about art, poetry, writing, and anything about creativity. Sit back, relax, and get your dose of brain food to get your creative juices flowing. Welcome to episode 49. Today's featured guest is Beverly Parayno. She is from East San Jose. Her fiction, memoir, essays, and author interviews have appeared in Narrative Magazine, Bellingham Review, World Literature, The Rumpus, Warscapes, and Huazache, among others. Her work has been translated into Mandarin by the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. She is currently working on a memoir entitled Run, set during her teenage runaway years in upstate New York in the mid-1980s. Parayno earned an MA from University College Cork and an MFA from Vermont College of Fine Arts. Currently, she serves on the board of PAWA, a non-profit arts organization and publisher dedicated to supporting and promoting Filipinx writers, and on the executive committee of Litquake. She is a grants consultant for social justice nonprofits in the Bay Area. You can find her at beverlyparayno.com. Everyone, please welcome my next featured guest, Beverly Parayno. Hi, Beverly. Thank you for coming on the show. Finally.
Hi, Christina. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
We met at the 5th Annual Filipino American International Book Fest in San Francisco this past October in 2019. It was a pleasure meeting you. You are one of the organizers of PAWA, which is Philippine American Writers and Artists, which is a huge nonprofit organization for Filipino Americans, literary and arts, and they do fantastic work supporting Filipino Americans. And I just want to say that I have never gone to a book fest out there, and it was just absolutely magical for me to be surrounded by fellow writers. And I want to say thank you to you, the organization, Edwin Lozada. So how did you become involved in that?
Well, I have been involved in PAWA for less than a year. It'll actually be a year in May. And the funny thing is, I really have not been involved in the Filipino writing community at all, really. So I'm kind of an outsider. I did participate in one reading many years ago, but other than that, I've really been on the periphery. And so I got inspired by Diasporic Vietnamese Artist Network called Divan, and they have a project within Divan called She Who Has No Masters, and it's all female and non-gender conforming writers who really are like their own collective, and they read together and they travel together and they do presentations. So I've been to a few of their events, and I thought, that'd be cool if PAWA had something like that, like a collective within PAWA. So I reached out to Edwin last year in the spring, and he was happy to meet me for coffee. I pitched my idea to him. He loved it. And then he proceeded to talk to me about all the things that PAWA has done in the past and all the things PAWA is doing now. And it was just, it was a wonderful meeting. We met for several hours, and he invited me to attend a board meeting, which was happening the following weekend. And so I showed up and just kind of wanted to get a sense for who's on the board and what they talk about. So really just thought I would be kind of like a silent observer in the meeting. But somehow, halfway through the meeting, Edwin appointed me to the board. So that's how I
Wow.
That's how I got on the board of PAWA. Yeah. And it's funny
because that's what happens when you have those big ideas.
Well, I kind of feel like he was reading my mind because while I was sitting there in the meeting, I was saying to myself, I wonder how I could get on this board. I wonder what I have to do. I wonder what the process is. So it's almost like he was reading my mind.
The Book Fest, it's a 5th annual Book Fest. So that's been going on. And it doesn't happen every year, correct?
It happens every other year. So the next one will be 2021.
All right. All right. So that's fairly new. I mean, this fifth annual going on sixth. So, and also POWA's involved in Kundiman, I believe.
POWA actually gives scholarships to
Scholarships.
to Kundiman as well as Vona. Yeah. So what we do is we support emerging Filipinx writers through scholarship. We provide the scholarship directly to Vona and to Kundiman, and then they pick an emerging Filipinx writer who will benefit from a POWA scholarship.
Right. That's what I thought I read. Yeah. So lots of good things for up and coming Philippine American writers. It's fantastic that you're at the helm of shaping the future of that. But before we move on to explain what fabulous things you do creatively, you are a fiction writer, first and foremost, correct?
I have written fiction. I think nowadays I identify more as a creative nonfiction writer.
Ah, okay. So CNF. All right. Please tell the audience where you're from and where you grew up.
Sure. So I am from the Bay Area. I was born in Alameda from immigrant parents from the Philippines. And at some point, I lived on the East Coast, but I was very young. I don't remember. My older sisters, they started school out on the East Coast, but then we returned to Alameda by the time I started school. So I actually went to kindergarten and first grade in Alameda at a time where it was not diverse at all. The school was all white. I had a very racist teacher and grew up around a lot of racism, a lot of discrimination at that time in Alameda, which is not the case now. It's very diverse now, but back then it was very white. And then we ended up moving to the suburbs out in San Jose because my parents knew of relatives and friends from the Philippines who lived out there. And they wanted to raise us in kind of a more suburban setting, less urban. And so I was really, really happy when we moved to San Jose, to East San Jose, the Evergreen area of East San Jose, because when I started school there, I remember walking into my classroom and just seeing brown faces, Filipinos, Chinese, Japanese. There were a lot of Chicanos, Chicanas. There were African Americans. And I just had this huge sigh of relief, like, God, I don't stand out anymore.
It's like when I went to San Francisco for the first time in a long time. I was like, oh, wow, this is great. I mean, I'm not like the only brown person, like I'm the only minority in the whole state. It feels like sometimes.
Oh, right.
In Florida. No, I won't go that drastically, but very rarely run into Filipinos here, though.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Can you tell us how you became a writer?
Well, it's been a really long and winding journey. It took me a really long time to believe I was a writer or realize I was a writer and recognize myself as one. I really thought everyone else was a writer. I mean, anyone could say I'm a poet or I'm a writer and I would believe them. But I just never felt like I could be one or, I could identify as one comfortably. But I started writing pretty late. I didn't enter my MFA program until I was in my 40s. So it's been a really long road. I think before that, I'd studied literature. I worked at volunteered at a small press in the city. I volunteered as an intern at a literary agency in Palo Alto. I volunteered at a literature center in Ireland when I was working out there. When I was studying out there. So I spent a lot of time around books, around writers, supporting other people, reading other people's work. It took me a long time to realize that I wanted to be a writer. I think that was there the whole time, and that's why I was so close to other writers and writing. And when I finally started writing, it was actually when I was living in Ireland. I would go to the Munster Literature Thursday workshops, and it was like one paragraph at a time. Like people would bring in a full poem or a story, and then there was me with my paragraph, because I just was starting out, and like writing a paragraph for me was a lot of work. And I just committed when I got back from Ireland to continue writing. So that's kind of how I started. And at the time, I got a job at Stanford in the development department, and they had a benefit where you could take classes through the extension for free if you were an employee. And so I started taking writing classes on the Stanford campus at night, and I loved it at first. And then I kind of got a little frustrated because I felt like people weren't very serious in these classes. A lot of them were, I don't know, people just were sort of taking the classes as a hobby. And and that's when I was like, I just want to be around more serious people. And I didn't have a writing community or anything like that. So I decided to try to go for an MFA, even though I really didn't have that much, hadn't produced that much yet. I had a hard time coming up with a 20-page sample to get into an MFA program. That's how little I had. But so that's how I started.
It's interesting. So, because I didn't finish my MFA. Well, 43 I entered, and then, it takes a couple years. I think I was in the same boat as you. Were you publishing though before your MFA?
No, I'd never published.
Okay, so that's very interesting, because when I read your work, and it's just gorgeous work, and you got your pieces in some very good, literary magazines. It's like you had this desire, and you surrounded yourself with like people, and then you pursued on, getting your MFA, and now you are just legit doing the writer's work now and publishing, and you're all in the mix. Do you feel a lot of pressure, or do you feel relief?
I sort of feel both, I suppose. So I think, before I had an MFA, all I kept thinking was everything will be great when I get an MFA. And then I got an MFA, and I wasn't satisfied. And I thought, everything will be great when I publish.
I hear you.
Then I published something, and it's like still not satisfied. And so now it's like everything will be great when, my memoir manuscript, gets published. So it's never right. It's
right.
But I think the one difference is I'm very different from how I was during the MFA program and after I got out of the program. I was super aggressive and really hungry and submitting everywhere and really, really pushing myself to write. And I think now I'm probably a lot more relaxed about it and wanting to do things on my own time and not putting too much pressure on myself. So, I mean, that could be good and bad, but for me, it's a better place to be right now.
Right. So you're working on your memoir then, right?
Yeah, I have pretty much a finished manuscript that I'm revising.
Oh, good. Good.
It's called Run, and it covers 4 years during my teenage runaway days when I dropped out of high school and ran off with my boyfriend to Hyde Park, New York, which is like maybe an hour outside of New York City.
Yeah. I know that.
Yeah. So
it's interesting. Wow. Well, I definitely want to know. So why did you drop out?
Well, I had actually run away several times before that, but it was more within Santa Clara County and within San Jose. I think I started running away when I was a freshman in high school, and I didn't get along. It's different now, but I didn't get along with my dad, and he was very strict, pretty like overwhelming as a dad growing up. Under him and his rules, he was violent, and it was a very patriarchal household. My mom was pretty submissive, and my dad pretty much made all the rules and was really firm about how things would run. And so we butted heads. I'm the third. There's four of us, but I'm the third girl. My two older sisters, and my mom, they didn't really resist very much. They kind of just accepted that's the way it is, and that's the way the household is going to run. And I, being the rebel and just being really, I think, attuned to injustices, felt it was wrong, and I didn't understand why things had to be that way. So I resisted a lot, and I would push back. And so there was more friction between us than anyone else in the household.
Yeah, I could relate to that. My teenage years were pretty much like that. I'm deemed the black sheep of the family because I always do some crazy stuff. I enjoy learning about other people's struggles because that's what makes us human, right? To kind of like relate to other people's struggles and make that connection. So I have read several of your pieces that you sent over to me. I have to say that you and I have some common things, and we actually are from the same town in the Philippines. And this I know because you read one of my pieces, like on Facebook or something. It was a story that was located there, and then you proceeded to tell me that you were from there. I'm like, no, you're not.
I know, it's so funny.
But you write about the Philippines too. Even though we grew up here, mainly, well, I came here when I was 18, but still.
I've only written a few pieces set in the Philippines, and it makes me very nervous to do so. I feel like an imposter a little bit, and like maybe I'm not going to get it right. So I have done it. And I have published a few stories that are set in the Philippines. It's not the most comfortable thing for me to do. But,
well, if I may interject, from my perspective, though, you spoke to me because that is the perspective that I come from also. We grow up, especially what was that piece you had that spoke about your Auntie C?
Divorce triptych. Yeah.
Yes. And, there are certain things that you just don't talk about, in the family. And there's always, you always have to kind of lie to get by, just so you don't hurt anybody's feelings or have to go through explaining. I could totally relate. So from that standpoint, I'd say it came very authentic to me. But I see what you mean by writing about all things Filipino, the history and everything that. And then you also have a piece which is really interesting, your family's story during World War II, correct?
Victory Joe. So that story, there's a few reasons. There's some backstory to that story. I think the main thing I was trying to do, it's a story set during World War II, when World War II just ended and America liberated the Philippines from the Japanese. And I think there was a few things that I wanted to do in that story. One of them is because I mentioned earlier that my dad had a violent temper growing up. The young boy in that story is my dad's. That character is really based on my dad, and that was that was my attempt at trying to understand who is this person who grew up to be my dad one day, and what motivated him to be the kind of dad that he was, which was on one hand a loving and caring dad, on the other hand a really frightening dad to me. So kind of what happened to him and what did he go through, and so that story for me was a way to explore his character, and it was also a way for me to get to know his mom, my grandmother, who did pass away from complications with starvation after the war. So I never met her, so it was just sort of like maybe I could try to visualize what those last months would have been like when the war was over. She was sick and everyone around her was rebuilding, but she didn't make it.
Yeah, it was through her perspective, and you really brought her to life in that piece. It was very moving, in fact. I mean, I grew up with those stories too. I mean, my mom was saying, because I think she was like a little child when it happened, and they had to just pick up and go and move and run into the rice paddies like you guys, your family did. Exactly. It was the same exact story almost. But I didn't know the aftermath, like what happened after, it's like, and it was interesting to see that, play out in your story and explain the things that people had to go through after, the war. Well, without further ado, let's go ahead and do you have a short piece for us that you would like to share?
Sure, I would love to. Maybe I could read just a scene. So this is a scene from a story called Savior, and it appears in a Latino magazine called Huizache, founded and edited by Dagoberto Gilb. And I met Dagoberto at the Squaw Valley Community of Writers workshop, and he read this story and he took it right away. And I was really thankful because I had been wrestling with the story for so long, and I was like, oh my God, just take it so I can stop working on it.
Oh.
Okay, here's an excerpt. The character, a lot of my fiction is autofiction. So the character, Filipino American, she's in the 6th grade. This is set in San Jose, and it's a scene between her and her dad. She's doing her homework, and her dad is making dinner. When Dad came home from work, I heard him empty his thermos in the sink, followed by the schluck of a beer can opening. He was a chef at the children's shelter, which meant he cooked all day and then came home to make us dinner. I'd heard stories at the dinner table about how he served as a mentor to the kids, even helping pregnant teenagers. Once, when Mom and I visited him there, the kids crowded around him, tugged at his pants and shirt. "Come on, Mr. Bernal, can I please have another soda?" It never occurred to me to ask twice for something I had been denied. The thought of those kids doing it made me nervous. I watched for Dad's reaction, checking for the vein in his neck, the twitch in his cheek. When he passed by my room, I put my head down and began writing furiously in my notebook. Mom wouldn't be home until midnight. I had to keep quiet and look busy. Dad changed into shorts and a tank top before he set up a thawed chicken on a cutting board in the kitchen and hacked it up into pieces with a giant knife. Before working at the children's shelter, he'd been a chef in the Navy for over 20 years, and some of his dishes, like shit on a shingle, made it to our table. Saying the name of this recipe was the only time I was allowed to swear in front of him in English. He chopped green peppers and onions, which he browned on a skillet before stirring in the tomato broth. I smelled the meat from my room and heard the click of the rice cooker to indicate it was done. I still had to solve 10 math problems before dinner, but was nowhere near finishing. Dad came into my room to check on me in between stirring the machado and listening to a speech by President Carter on TV. I sat at my desk, the one made of a soft wood I could carve into with my pencil. There was a red lamp in the corner with a big white lampshade, and a green frog pencil holder, one of my favorite possessions. My math book was wide open. "What problem are you on?" he asked. "Number 3. 8 minus Q equals 3/5, he read aloud over my shoulder. 8 minus Q equals 3/5, he repeated, as if saying so would produce the answer. He stared at the problem for a while, and then asked to read the instructions at the beginning of the chapter. Dad had no patience for homework. Grandma once shared with me late at night that Dad had dropped out of high school in the Philippines so he could work as a tricycle driver to help support the family and send his younger sister to nursing school. 8 minus Q equals 3/5, he repeated. He checked the back of the book for the answer and then proceeded to flip between the problem and answer, problem, answer, problem, answer. He wrote down a few numbers that were illegible and then erased them so hard the paper began to tear. The stew simmered over in the pot, sizzling against the hot stove. "Dinner's burning," I said. With one full sweep of his arm, Dad knocked everything off my desk, my papers, books, frog, and flowers. When the lamp hit the ground, the whole room went dark. I tucked my head into my arms and folded over. He landed a punch in the middle of my back. An explosion of pain moved up my spine. I sucked in air and tried not to cry. "Pay attention in class next time, Lourdes," he said, as he walked out of the room. I sat in my chair for a long while after he left. It never felt right to move afterward. It felt like I was supposed to stay frozen for as long as possible, or he would come back around and do it all over again. The following day, Mom called the principal's office to let them know I had a cold. She lifted my shirt to inspect the bruising. "Say your prayers, Lourdes anak ko, my child." After Mom left for work in the afternoon, I closed my bedroom door, drew my curtains, and switched my lamp to the nightlight setting, turning the whole room dark red. I thought of I Dream of Jeannie and how I wanted to transport myself to her world with its pink and purple cushions, deep inside a tiny bottle.
Wow, that's so sad. I'm speechless. It's just a very powerful scene there. You see it through the child's eyes and just wonder, like, what goes through the father's mind, you know? Thank you for sharing that. Where can people learn more about you and your work online?
My website is www.beverlyparayno.com.
Mm-hmm. And so you blog on there, I see.
I blog a little. I should blog more.
Okay, so what is your short-term goal? I know you said you're working on your manuscript. Do you have several things going on, like several pieces you're working on?
The big project is the memoir and then lots of essays. I have lots of different essays, probably too many, all in different stages of completion.
Mm-hmm. What is your process? Why did you choose CNF?
I started with fiction, and really fiction was a way for me to really examine my life and write about my experiences. And almost everything I've written, I would consider autofiction. Very few pieces are really pure fiction. Mm-hmm. And so I think it was a natural transition for me to just sort of move into writing directly about my experiences. I'm really attracted and interested in memory. I'm fascinated by memory and why we remember certain events when so many other events in our lives come and go and we never think of them again. So the pieces that I'm working on, as well as the memoir, those are things that they have surfaced in my mind and have really been asked, they're asking to be written. That's what I know. That's why I know what I should work on next, because pieces ask me to write them. And so I say, okay, I'll write you. And if I don't, they won't go away. It's sort of like they'll knock on the door and I have to answer it.
It's drawing from those memories. Sometimes it takes form in personas and things like that, but a lot of it is all personal, memory. Well, I certainly cannot wait to see your work out there. And just let me know how's that going for you, and when we make that announcement of your publication.
Thank you. And I really want to thank you for not only interviewing me, but interviewing so many other artists and writers and artists. I've spent time doing interviews, and I know that they're time consuming, and you have your own projects and a lot of your own work going on, and I'm sure very busy. And so, it's a really big thing to take time to promote other people.
Yeah, speaking of which, because that's what you do also. I mean, you go ahead and, you volunteer. I mean, you do a lot of things aside from your own creative work. So I have to ask you, what motivates you to do that as well?
Well, I think I'm right now, my main volunteer kind of jobs are with PAWA as a board member and on the executive committee of LitQuake, where I help run the Lit Crawl event, which is the culminating event of LitQuake. And I think it's what I'm attracted to there is really just helping to promote other writers and artists, and really, just be a part of the community and give back. And I don't know, it just feels really good.
It does. And I have to say, being artists and writers, we certainly know what it feels like, not having people kind of understand what we do. Like the real world, like the other side. I don't know how to explain it, but
right.
Because when you build, you're in your community, you're like safe. You feel like you can, you can talk and converse and understand each other, as opposed to trying to explain to others what it is you do and what's your work.
Right.
So, and that's what I try to tell young writers also, is to find your community, establish a community, surround yourself with people of like-minded folks,
Absolutely.
That's where that support is going to come from.
Absolutely. And there's I've done all kinds of volunteering in the past that are outside of the literary world. And that has just been so rewarding, just, delivering food to the elderly, or making lunches for houseless people, or volunteering, to help with, don't laugh, but I volunteer. I do a lot of free readings. I'm training to be an animal communicator, so I can read and talk to animals. So I do a lot of readings. I can read your dogs if you want.
Really? I am so interested. You can be my translator. Well, yeah. Aren't they great creatures? Oh, I love the doggies.
They have a lot. They have a super lot to say too. It's amazing.
I'm going to have to take you up on that for real.
Yeah, I do all kinds of pro bono readings for animal readings, because I'm learning. So it's a way for someone to get a free reading and for me to get better.
So is this like animal behavior kind of thing, or is it more like intuitive stuff?
It's intuitive. It's telepathic communication with animals.
Do you do that with people too?
Yeah, I can do it with people too.
Wow. Well, you and I have discussed about our family in the Philippines. Yeah. So I can relate to that as well, because I come from a whole line of people who can do that.
Yeah, it runs all up and down my mom's side.
Well, it's been fun. I'm so glad I got a chance to, link up with you and learn more about your work, because like I said, I met you in San Francisco, but we never really got sat down and really talk about what, you do and everything like that. But I'm glad that now we can share it with other folks,
Thanks, Christina.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Well, it's been great catching up with you, and I wish you the best of luck and stay in touch, okay?
Okay, good luck to you too.
Well, everyone, that is it for now. Please tune in next week for my next featured guest. In the meantime, have a productive and creative week. Bye, Beverly.
Bye, Christina.